Welcome to Assembly Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Present. Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. Assemblywoman Brown May. Here. Assemblywoman Considine. Present. Assemblyman DeLong. Present. Assemblywoman Duran. Assemblyman Gurr. Here. Assemblywoman Hanson. Here. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Assemblyman Watts. Here. Assemblyman Urick. Chair Cohen.
Thank you, and I am present. Please mark other members present as they arrive, and this is the time of session where people are in other committees and going back and forth, so we will just move forward. We have one bill today. I'll dispense with the opening remarks, as I think we all pretty much know them, but just please silence any electronic devices. That's the one that seems to get people the most. And then we will also have a public comment and possibly a work session. So with that, we are going to hear Senate Bill 88, which requires the Joint Interim Committee on Natural Resources to conduct an interim study of certain state agencies, and we'll invite Assemblymember Watts to provide his presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Hello again. For the record, Howard Watts representing Assembly District 15, and it's my pleasure to present Senate Bill 88 for your consideration today. This was yet another recommendation from the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Natural Resources. It would require the next Joint Interim Committee to conduct a study of agencies that regulate natural resources. So without reading the content of the bill, it's fairly short and clear, and so basically, this would just require that as part of the agenda for the next interim, the Joint Natural Resources Committees would dedicate time to look at the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, the Commission on Mineral Resources, entities within DCNR, and then the State Environmental Commission. It does not direct any or require any particular outcome. I'll try and keep this very brief. There have been multiple proposals over many sessions, including this one, to look at the makeup of the of various boards, to look at the mission of some of these agencies, and all the time we've had conversations in the context of one particular proposal. Some have been successful, many have not, but often that leads to kind of a divide of folks who support and are trying to make their case for that, or oppose a particular proposal and make their case for that. And we have the Sunset Subcommission, Subcommittee that looks at various boards and commissions, but it's more, are they meeting? Are they fulfilling their role as it's laid out in statute? The goal of this is to bring in, for example, the National Conference of State Legislatures to look at what are some of the models that exist in other places so that we have that information available to us. Have there been any trends recently in changes that that have been made or proposed? And then to allow all different stakeholders to come up and have some time on the agenda to talk about what they think would improve things, what voices might be missing, and to have that back and forth with legislators outside of the 120 days of the session, outside the context of any particular proposal. And perhaps there'll be some things that folks can talk about and work on and find some consensus around to bring forward something that can be considered in a future legislature and make improvements for these entities and perhaps avoid some of the conflict that's popped up on these issues in the past. So that's what the purpose behind the bill is. And with that, I'm glad to answer any questions that members of the committee have. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. I have a question from Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation of the Senate bill. I just want to make sure that the bill language says without limitation. the committee shall examine. I just want to make sure that all of the appropriate entities are included in the study, and just to confirm on the record that that really is the intention. And if there is a board or a commission that oversees something relative to wildlife, that we don't leave them out inadvertently.
Howard Watts for the record. Thank you for that. Yes, that is correct. I didn't want to list every single entity. Again, there's been a lot of conversations about the Board of Wildlife Commissioners and so that's the reason why. Not to say that there has to be something, but it's been a frequent theme of conversation. So I wanted to make sure that it was clear that should be part of the conversation. Again, mineral resources and the structure for kind of mining. I brought forward a bill related to this last session, and again, I think through that process there were some interesting ideas that came up and some interest on exploring those further, but ultimately disagreement on that policy, and there hasn't really been additional conversation since then. And then within DCNR, there are many entities, some of which don't have. So these, are both boards with appointments from the governor. DCNR, I mean, as we've seen, they regulate water rights, many other things, and adopt regulations without having that kind of board structure. But that doesn't mean that, looking at their mission, the way they go about that, should be total, and their overall purview should be totally off the table. Again, some of these conversations started coming up during the last interim, and instead of recommending specific changes in any of these areas based on some of the individual concerns that were raised, the proposal was, let's kick this into the next interim and give it the time and kind of the holistic scope that I think it deserves. And again, something may come out of it, something may not, but I think it's a conversation worth having.
And following up on that question, were there any other boards or commissions or departments that you thought of specifically adding that there was a decision made not to, or?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. Howard Watts for the record. No, nothing was explicitly excluded. Again, I didn't want to do a laundry list. There are many other entities out there. For example, I will mention one. So the Board of Agriculture isn't on here because we considered and passed legislation to change the makeup of the Board of Agriculture last session. And that was an instance where there was definitely some back and forth, but there was ultimately a successful effort to say the overall scope and activities of the Department of Agriculture has changed. Some of those sectors were not represented on the board, and so there was an effort to make sure those different sectors had a seat at the table. So I didn't put that on there because I think that we just made those changes. Again, the without limitation allows ideas to come up. Typically in the first meeting of the interim, members of the joint committees bring forward ideas of things that they'd like to look into. So I think that is one of the things that could generate ideas for what ends up on the agenda. And then, also I think there's a lot of encouragement for members of the public and stakeholders to provide ideas of things for the interim committees to consider, and that would be another way to generate ideas of which agencies to look at and who to reach out to get ideas and feedback from.
Thank you for that. Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello. I'm just curious, it's a very small bill. Wondering, so the genesis you kind of got to a little bit, but when we think about the makeup issues maybe with the Wildlife Commission, or you mentioned maybe the makeup on the Commission on Mineral Resources, can you give us some real-life reasons or maybe situations you've seen that would maybe lead us to think we need to study it? Has there been some concern that the makeup isn't balanced? So if you could just give us some particulars.
Glad to do that. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Howard Watts, for the record. So there's been significant debate with the Board of Wildlife Commissioners in general. So sportsmen make up a majority of that body. There's been a lot of debate about that, and there have been proposals brought forward in the past to change that. On the flip side, there have been multiple pieces of legislation brought forward to add an additional position that would be a sportsman that is specifically a guide brought forward by the guide community. And so, again, while I may personally have opinions, this is not about taking a position one way or another, but instead of arguing the pros and cons of that particular idea, let's step back and look at what do other boards in other states membership look like. Another thing that's been a really frequent topic of conversation, particularly throughout our tenure in the legislature, has been representation of Native Americans and indigenous communities, and there's been quite a few policies to try and add positions for Native Americans or tribal members or tribal governments onto some of these bodies. And again, instead of having that just thrown out there, I think this could be a forum where issues like that could be brought forward and considered. So that is one idea. So speaking to mineral resources, there is, I think, one area that gets brought up and that I do tend to agree is there's quite a bit of regulation on the mining industry, and there are quite a few entities. So you've got the Commission on Mineral Resources, the Division of Minerals. You have the State Environmental Commission, which also plays a role. You've got the Mining Oversight and Accountability Commission, and then that's not even to get into taxation and safety and some of the other aspects. And so I tried to bring forward something that might consolidate that a little bit, and that ultimately didn't move forward. But again, I think looking at that, and there has historically been concern or critique of the commission's makeup, which is, I think, almost all industry, various industry members. I think there's one general public member, and at times the general public member has been retired from industry. One of the big picture issues that I think also comes up is you're trying to attract diversity of opinions and people to participate on these things, but it generally brings in just the people who are most interested. And so sometimes the general public members really kind of fit into one of the other categories that's usually laid out in statute. And again, without saying that that's exactly right or wrong, if the goal of having those positions is to diversify the kind of thoughts on that board, that might not quite achieve that goal. So those are some of the things that have kind of come up and been discussed in the past that led to this being brought forward.
A question from the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing forward the language. Looking forward to seeing some of the findings from it. Out of curiosity, will there also be any sort of discussion around the federal partnerships? Because I think we all know what a huge part the federal legislation and also other entities, departments have to do with our natural resources.
Thank you for that question, Vice Chair. Howard Watts for the record. Thank you for all the questions. Wow. So that's not contemplated in this. Doesn't mean, and just to be completely clear, this would make sure that this is part of the agenda. Of course, this and the issue you brought up and other issues can all be part of the agenda, but I thought it was important to make sure that these issues were part of the agenda for the next interim, given all the bills and all the conversations that have happened in this area, even just in the time that I've been in the legislature and outside of that as well. So not to say that I think issues with federal agencies are definitely going to be discussed, but as far as kind of the makeup and structure of those, since we don't have the ability to change those, that wasn't really contemplated being part of this particular legislation.
Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Just trying to wrap my brain around it a little bit. It almost it sounds like the intent is to actually look at what has been the legislative scope and breadth of the mandate for various boards and agencies, rather than looking at how each of them are functioning. Am I interpreting what you're saying correctly?
Howard Watts for the record. Thank you for that question, Assemblyman. It's kind of both, because there have been conversations about these things as well in terms of what is the statutory mission or scope of certain entities, and then again where we have some of these appointed bodies, the makeup of those as well. So I think a fair answer is it's a bit of both.
A follow-up, Chair? Just appreciate that. And if it does go down the board of basically providing recommendations to the legislature on changing the scope of the regulatory mandate, that really needs to be considered separately from how programs are being implemented. And would want to make sure that this interim study fully considers the need for those to be looked at separately.
Thank you for that question. Howard Watts for the record. I would agree with that. And while ultimately we never have any control over what future bodies do, I think that it's important. I would agree with that, and I think it's important to get that on the record in this hearing, is that there are kind of, within this, there are different sets of issues, and that any proposal should kind of look at one at a time, and there shouldn't be a combining of multiple things in one kind of proposal. I would agree with that assessment.
Okay, and I have another question from Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you. I'm sorry, this conversation spurred another question. So thinking about the load that the Joint Interim Committee on Natural Resources would have, because the study itself would take place within that. It's not going to be some separate group, right? I'm thinking this is quite a load. We didn't always meet every month in the interim, and I was fine with that. And now we're going to also have public lands within that, my little pitch right there. So I'm just wondering, this seems like a lot to look at in an interim. And so I'm just curious why you don't bring it in bill form. Am I mistaken? I think you mentioned you brought a bill, it didn't come forward. I was thinking there was one to address maybe the makeup of the Wildlife Commission. Am I not remembering correctly?
Thank you for that question, Assemblywoman Hanson. Howard Watts for the record. So I did not bring forward, and I think the only bill that was brought forward, I've never brought a bill forward related to the makeup of the Wildlife Commission. I had a lot of conversations about it. And the only bill that I know of that came forward this session was actually on the Senate side, again, related to the representation of guides on that board. To your point, again, just being fully honest, yes, it is. This is something that could be done no matter what. Just to provide a little bit of additional context, so last session, as part of the water conservation legislation that we moved forward, it tasked the interim to take up a study of water conservation. And so we held one meeting in Boulder City of the Public Land Subcommittee specifically focused on that issue, but it was also kind of a theme, right? And as we traveled to other areas and held additional meetings and worked with people's schedules, tried to make sure that was a substantial part of the agenda. So that's really kind of what's envisioned with this. So it's not saying that anything's needs to be displaced. And really, to your point around workload, so there's kind of a scoping once the chair is selected to figure out what the workload is, what are the issues, how many meetings might be needed. I would say pretty confidently that natural resources didn't meet every month, but we did pretty much meet every month between natural resources and public lands. And so with that consolidation, I expect that same number of meetings between the two, both the committee and subcommittee, will probably be there. I think we had ultimately 8 total meetings during the interim. And so this would be spread out across those 8 meetings. And if it seemed like taking this on would require a little bit extra, you know, the leadership of that interim committee could request in setting up kind of the budget and the allocation for that from the legislative commission that there be an extra meeting.
Okay, seeing no other questions, let's move into support. Do we have anyone for support in Carson City?
Good afternoon, Chair Cohen and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Rebecca Goff, and I'm the Nevada State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. On behalf of our Nevada members, we support SB 88. Such an examination is critically needed at this time when state wildlife governance faces increasing calls to adapt to a changing public values and attitudes towards wildlife. Recent landmark research from the Colorado State University called the American Wildlife Values Project found that animal welfare has become an increasingly important concern for the general public nationwide. The research found that twice as many Nevadans hold mutualist views in which they believe that humans should humanely coexist with wildlife than those who hold a more traditional view that wildlife should be used and managed for human benefit. And more than 66% of Nevada residents surveyed that study agreed that our state should strive for environmental protection over economic growth. The study called The Nature of Americans Report found that Americans express broad interest in nature, believing connecting with nature is important, and want to conserve wildlife species and their habitats. Research also finds a significant improvement in public attitudes in recent decades towards historically feared or misunderstood species like coyotes and wolves, and that such a change may be indicative of growing concern for the welfare of animals, both wild and domestic. Only 2.9% of Nevadans were paid hunting license holders in 2021, yet the vast majority of Nevadans who do not hunt or trap continue to have little to no say in the decisions about the wildlife that is held in trust for them. We therefore ask this committee to approve SB 88 to examine the composition, mission, and scope of state agencies that regulate our precious natural resources that belong to all Nevadans. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera-Georgeson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Conservation League. We're here in support of SB 88. These agencies are critical to managing and protecting our natural resources, and it's important that they properly reflect the values and demographics of the state today. So we urge the committee's support. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Bebe Adams, B-E-B-E-A-D-A-M-S, and I represent Friends of Nevada Wildlife, and I am just going to say ditto. We support this, and we hope you all have voted through. Thanks so much.
That was so fast, Miss Adams. I didn't have time to write down your name and who you're with before you were done. But, okay, so seeing no one else in Carson City, I don't think there's anyone in Elko. Is there anyone in Las Vegas in support? Okay, seeing no one, BPS, if we can go to the phones, please.
If you would like to testify in support of Senate Bill 88, please press star 9 now or raise your hand in the Zoom client to take your place in the queue. Call-in user, you are unmuted and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Toby Tyler, a volunteer member of the Sierra Club's Legislative Committee. On behalf of the Sierra Club and our more than 30,000 members and supporters statewide, I am speaking in support of SB 88. SB 88 would require a joint interim committee on natural resources to conduct an interim study of certain state agencies. This study would include examining the composition, mission, and scope of the Board of Wildlife Commissioners, the Commission of Mineral Resources, the State Department of Conservation and the Natural Resources and State Environmental Commission, and reporting their findings and recommendations for any legislation to the 83rd session of the Nevada Legislature. We urge you to support SB 88 because it's time to take a more detailed, extensive, holistic look at these agencies in terms of how we manage natural resources, protect our limited water supplies, and ensure that we are not putting extractive moneyed interests over protecting our environment for all Nevadans. A study would allow for a more thorough examination of these agencies and allow various interest groups to meet and discuss other states' trends and regulatory structures. For these reasons, we urge you to support SB 88. Thank you.
Caller, you are unmuted on our end. Is your phone muted? Chair, we are having issues with the caller.
Thank you, BPS. And to the caller, if you can't get through, we're going to go to opposition and neutral, and you can keep trying and we'll accommodate you when you call back in. But with that, is there anyone in opposition in Carson City? Okay, seeing none, seeing no one in the room in Elko, and if there's anyone in Las Vegas in opposition, please come forward. Seeing none, BPS, if we can go to the phones for opposition.
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Okay, then we will go to neutral in Carson City. Seeing none, seeing no one in Elko. Is there anyone in Las Vegas in the room in neutral? Okay, seeing none, BPS, if you can go to the phones for neutral.
If you would like to testify neutral on SB 88, please press *9 now or raise your hand in the Zoom client to take your place in the queue.
Yes, hello. Are you able to hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, very good. I was trying to call in earlier, and there was some sort of technical problem where you couldn't hear me. I wanted to support SB 88. May I speak now?
Yes, please just make sure and give us your name.
Of course. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Fred Volz, V as in Victor, O-L-T-Z, and I'd like to speak in strong support of SB 88. I do believe we need to add the Department of Wildlife to the list of 4 agencies that would be looked at by the interim committee. So far, we have taken a very piecemeal approach to any modifications, and there really is a need for a complete look at how all of these individual operations interact with one another and how they impact the state. For example, the State Wildlife Commission has gone everywhere from 3 members to 17 elected members over time, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Sunset Subcommittee deals with departments one at a time. Again, we need a holistic approach to looking at all natural resource issues, and this interim study would do that. And finally, regardless of somebody's individual politics, good government means that a periodic review of state agencies is a good operating strategy and a good management strategy. Thank you.
Okay, so I will, as there's no one else on the phones, if the presenter would like to make any closing remarks? Mr. Watts? Okay. He's grudgingly waving us off. Okay, so with that, we are not going to have a work session at this time. But I will, well, first I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 88. We are not going to have a work session at this time, but we are going to have public comment. So is there anyone in the room for public comment in Carson City? Okay, seeing none, seeing no one in Elko. Is there anyone for public comment in Las Vegas? Okay, BPS, seeing no one in Las Vegas, BPS, if you could go to the phones for public comment, please.
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
All right, so thank you with that. So committee, I'm not sure what we're going to see. I believe there's at least one more bill coming over from the Senate, but we'll see. So with that, we are adjourned.